A major study suggests a significant number of the UK's wildlife species are at risk of dying out. The State of Nature paper assessed 10,000 species of animals and plants and found that 16% were threatened with extinction. The government has said it is committed to increasing the amount of habitat for nature to thrive. Well, our reporter Mark Lebel is outside the Department for Environment, where protesters have been gathering throughout the morning. And Mark, a real call for change where you are, because some of these findings from this report, they are quite concerning.
Yeah, as you can hear behind me, this stark warning for plants and animals across the UK in this report has triggered a call for action here from over 40 organisations, research and conservation organisations, demanding change from the government. Well, there's one man behind that call for action who's organised the whole thing. He's called Chris Packham, and he joins me now, the conservationist. Chris, thanks for joining me.
A pleasure, thank you.
How do you think your protest is going so far?
I think it's going very well. We've managed to get a significant number of the UK NGOs, non-government organisations, essentially conservation charities, to come together because they're disgruntled. We've had yet another report published which tells us that the state of nature in the UK is desperate. Many species declining, many habitats disappearing. We know we can do something about it. Behind me, we have a raft of people with the skill set to recover and restore nature, but we need government assistance, and that's why we've come here today, to ask for more of that.
And we're outside the headquarters of the government's environment agency, essentially the functioning part of government that deals with environment, and it's had its budget cut. Yes. And yet you're asking for more incentives for farmers.
Indeed. Farmland covers 71% of the UK, and where we see environment schemes, essentially farm subsidies, giving farmers money to farm in a particular way that benefits wildlife, we see nature recovery. But only 20% of our farmers are in those schemes. And what we want this department to do is to get more funding from government so they can roll that out far more broadly, so that we get more farmers on board, and in the marine environment, more fisher people on board as well, and in the forestry department, more foresters on board. And if we were able to do that, there is still the capacity to turn things around. It would take some time, but we would be moving in the right direction. These people have all done great things, but we're not able to roll out our skills broadly enough and rapidly enough. So once again, we need public money in there, investing in nature and investing for our future.
That's what you want, but you've described this as a march to a funeral. I know you're upset with a lot of what the government's been saying about policy initiatives on the environment, pouring cold water over a number of initiatives recently.
Yeah, this government have come in as a government that want to be the greenest of all, but in the time of their tenure they've started to row back on those policies. There is still time, and of course we are approaching an election. So part of my request this morning is that we ask all of our principal political parties to put robust, resilient and meaningful pledges into their manifestos when it comes to nature-friendly farming, forestry and fishing. But these things have to be mandatory. And perhaps that's the difference between myself and some of the organisations here who are still content to ask for that to happen. I think perhaps we've gone beyond that point. We need those things to be absolutely mandatory.
Now, the government is pledging to protect 30% of land and sea by 2030 and halve the use of pesticides by then. This is a very peaceful protest, as we can hear. It's very musical. The cello was playing earlier, a bit of a somber tone then. But what are you going to do if you don't get a reaction now? How peaceful are you going to remain?
These are peaceful people. There's no powder, no glue, and there's no paint here this morning, and that's not the way that our group will move here. We believe that we have the democratic right to ask our government and our political parties to do the right thing for nature, and we will be knocking on their door. We still have the opportunity, of course, to influence the shape of their manifestos, so that we and all of our members, everyone who follows, everyone in the UK that loves wildlife in any capacity, has that in mind when they go to the polls. Because what's clear is that we've got two very significant issues that we will be voting on here. Climate breakdown has come home to roost, and nature biodiversity loss has disappeared. Now, of course we've got cost of living crisis, of course we've got NHS, all of those things, but for the first time in the UK's history, this will be on the agenda, and our politicians are undoubtedly watching, but they've got to stand up and do the job.
Chris, a clear message from the streets of London. A lot of detail in that report, more details on the BBC website on the State of Nature report.
Mark Lebel, thank you for that update.